He's going to go on there and it just gets worse. What do you have that you did not receive? It's obviously a rhetorical question. Do you have a great job? You go, I worked hard to get my great job. No, you didn't. You used what God gave you. You were a faithful servant with what God gave you. That's what you did. God gave you either a brain or whatever, a strong back or whatever it might be that you use at your job. He gave that to you. You could not have that, right? You could not possess those things that allow you to do the job that you have. Then what would you say? So it's important. He says, we don't have anything that wasn't given to us. And so it is for us too in our Christianity. We all stand on the shoulders of those who went before us. The guys like, Walvrud. He's just a guy that I like to read. Or Dallas Willard, a guy I like to read. But it's, Walvrud he spent 60 years studying prophecy. I don't even like prophecy that much. It's not that exciting to me. I hope I don't offend anyone. It's not my deal. I think it's cool, but it's just not my deal. But Walvrud has a book. It's out of print now. It's about that big. And it's every prophecy of the Bible and how it intersects with every prophecy of the Bible. I couldn't do that. There's no way I could write that. There's no way I could sit in my office long enough to write that. But you and I get to benefit because God gifted him and he could do that. So we don't have the same ministry as Walvrud, but we get to benefit from his ministry. So what do we have? Nothing that we haven't been given. And when we realize that, it's a tremendous humbling, isn't it? Nobody here that's smart is smart because they made themselves smart. They're smart because God made them smart. Nobody here is super athletic because they made themselves super athletic, right? That's just not how it works. We have everything that we've been given, all truth and everything is because God has allowed us to have it. And then he's going to say, why do you boast as if you did not receive it? So there's the issue. Why be proud about something you had no control over? Verse 8, already you have all you want. Now he's going to actually, this is interesting. It's not facetious per se. It's not inappropriate humor to address something. It could be construed as sarcastic, but typically sarcasm is something where you are using to tear someone down. You're kind of using a plain or a generalized flat statement to try to show something else. I think, and I'm not trying to make excuses for Paul, I think because we read about his heart. Remember Paul's commentary in 2 Corinthians about when he handed the letter off to be given to the Corinthians. His testimony is, when I handed the letter off, I cried, because I knew it would hurt you, right? That's his testimony. So I don't think now he's using this to try to say, you guys are all punks. What he's doing is he's using, if you want to call it sarcasm, if you want to call it irony, he's using a certain way of speaking to them to show them where they think they're at versus what is reality. Does that make sense? So that's what he's about to go through. He says, already you have all you want. Already you have become rich. Without us, you have become kings. And I would that you did reign so that we might share the rule with you. So what he's telling the Corinthians now, remember, he just got done saying that they're boasting. He's gotten saying that they're carnal. They're relating to everything based on worldly wisdom, which is the idea of personal dominance and assertion, right? The completely opposite to Christ and his ideas. And so now what he's saying to them, he's ironically saying, you already have everything that you want. Do they? Maybe in the flesh they do, but they don't in the spirit, because their church is trashed right now. Their church is completely dysfunctional right now. Their church is shaming people right now. Their church is driving away people right now. So he's writing to them saying, you think you have everything that you want. Then he goes on this and he says, you think that you're rich. You think that you have this great wealth as a church. And he does compliment them. And if you were with us in 1 Corinthians 1, he says, you guys have every spiritual gift in operation there. And God is doing great things among you and all these things. And now he's coming back with irony saying, you think that you're rich. You have everything that you could need and more. And then he says this, you think that you've become kings. You've become kings. And then he says, you begin to reign without us. Now there were false teachers that were cropping up at Corinth, right? And we'll talk about that. That was happening at Corinth. And he's making the point, ironically, to them, you think you guys are squared away. You think you have everything you need, and you think it's without me. Now, is Paul self-important? Is he saying that he's the big cheese and that everybody? No, he's saying, and we'll get to it later, he started the church. He loves them like a father. He's been given he's a steward of God's mysteries. And so they're rejecting him in a lot of ways, which is part of what he's addressing, and he will more later. They're rejecting him, and he's saying, you think you're in this great position without me, but you're not. He says, you're in a terrible position. And he's going to go on in verse 9. For I think that God has exhibited us apostles as last of all, like men sentenced to death, because we have become a spectacle to the world, to angels, and to men. We are fools for Christ's sake, but you are wise in Christ. We are weak, but you are strong. You are held in honor, but we in disrepute. To the present hour we hunger and thirst. We are poorly dressed and buffeted and homeless. And we labor, working with our own hands. When reviled, we blessed. When persecuted, we endured. When slandered, we entreat. We have become and are still like the scum of the world, the refuse of all things. So Paul is setting up this comparison. And he's saying, you guys who are serving yourself, generally speaking, obviously there's Corinthian outliers because you have the household of Phoebe that sent the letter originally and all that. But generally speaking, he's saying, you guys at your church, you think you have it all together. You think that you're rich and you're reigning and all these things. And he says, in comparison, how we're viewed by the world, is he says that we are, go back there, he says, we're exhibited as the least of all. We're like men that are sentenced to death. In other words, the wisdom that the Corinthians are going through and are processing, the wisdom of this world, that's what it looks like to them. That Paul is a man sentenced to death. And in essence, he will be, right? He'll be beheaded by Nero after being in house arrest for a couple of years. So he says that we're like men sentenced to death because we have become a spectacle to the world. That's what they were. Felix, Festus, Nero, all these people he appeared before. All the Jews that ran him out, all those times, they were spectacles, right? Because they were servants of Christ. What he's illustrating, and we'd have to go read all the first 3 chapters, but what he's illustrating is he is walking the walk of the cross. He is adhering to the doctrine of Jesus, and this is their estimation of it. Whereas their estimation of where their church is at with all its deficiency and dysfunction is that they're kings and they're reigning and they have everything. So he's speaking in irony to them, and he says, look, you have to understand who we are and what God has called us to. He is not saying we should all sell everything and live in poverty. All right, that is not what he's saying. What he is saying is there will be a difference in the end between a person that lives by the philosophy, if I can call it that, please no one freak out, of the cross versus the philosophy of this world. That's what he's saying. And he says that the philosophy of the cross, that's where it took him. And he says they're spectacle because of the world to angels, even angels, heavenly, and this is reiterated for us actually in chapter 11. Angels look at Christians and learn about God's plan. That's mentioned throughout the Bible a couple times. So he says that we're, as God's servants, we're spectacles to angels. They're learning about what God is doing through us. He goes on, he says this, we are fools for Christ's sake, but you are wise in Christ. Again, that ironic. He says, you look at us and you say we're fools because we've sold everything. We've done everything. Our lives in the past are over because we're serving Christ and whatever he wants is what we do. We're fools for Christ. He says, but you estimate yourselves as being wise. We are weak, but you are strong. You are held in honor, but we in disrepute. So he's making these comparisons. He's saying, look, the way that you're living, the generalistic ideals from your church, they're so broken that you look at our lives, Paul says, people that serve God with everything they have, and you look at us and you go, you guys are idiots. You're unwise. What are you doing? And he's going to go on. He says, look, verse 14, the present hour, we hunger and thirst. We are poorly dressed and buffeted. It means beaten, and we're homeless. Homeless means, it doesn't mean just that like they didn't have houses, because we know Peter had a house and stuff like that. But it's the idea that they go from place to place. They have no, it's linked to rest. They're restless. They have no place to go and rest. Does that make sense? In this earth. They have no place where they belong on this earth. That's kind of what he's communicating there. Not just that he's like a vagrant or something like that. He says, and we labor, literally toiling to the point of exhaustion, working with our own hands. Remember, he made tents. When reviled means when we're insulted or when we're People say mean things about us. When we're reviled, we bless. When we're persecuted, we endure. It means we continue in it patiently. When we're slandered, when people say bad stuff about us, we entreat. Literally, we call people alongside of us. That's what the word means. It means to call someone alongside. Or literally, it could be translated, we beg people to come with us. So note the difference. One really looks like Jesus, doesn't it? And one really just looks like a bunch of really rich people that got together and like to talk about Jesus. And that's what he's saying. He's saying there's a huge difference. And as far as it is for the quality of God's kingdom. And then he's going to say, verse 13, we have become and are still the scum of the world, the refuse of all things. He says, people look at us and this is what they estimate us to be. The scum of the world. Literally, the refuse of all things is what people wash off their bodies. They look at us and we're just the scum, the skin oil and the bum sweat and the hair oil, everything that people wash off their bodies. He goes, that's what people esteem us as. It's an interesting point because as Christians, again, we've been saying this whole time, it's not about your salvation. Are you going to be saved if you do this? Are you not going to be saved? It's not. What it's about is, are you going to be part of what God is doing for his kingdom? And the more we invest and the more we yield to Christ and his Spirit in our lives, the more we invest in his kingdom and for our own sake and for those around us. And one investment at the end of days will yield incredible blessing to us and to those around us. And one investment, I should say the other investment in the end of days will result in nothing but disappointment. Having things burned away but saved by fire. And so Paul's just illustrating to the Corinthians, he says, look, this is the life that you perceive that we have. And some of it's true. They were hungry. They were shipwrecked. They were beaten. All those things were true. But at the same time, Paul had this incredible joy, inexplicable joy in the midst of some of the most radical suffering that we could imagine. And that's a testimony. It's a testimony to how great Jesus is, to how great his Spirit is, that we could go through suffering and it would actually be worth it.